Okay, I think we will get going, so if you could take your seats. I'd like to welcome you. I'm Darrell West, Vice President of Government Studies at Brookings, and also Director of our Center for Technology Innovation. So I'd like to welcome you to this breakout session on mobile empowering U.S. diplomacy. And for those of you on Twitter, you can use the hashtag #TechAtState, that's TechAtState, for any comments or questions you would like to pose. So the premise of this session is the importance of mobile technology for U.S. diplomacy. And there obviously are many benefits of using mobile technology in terms of the ease of access to information, borderless communications, the ability to monitor crises and conflict zones, and the use in public diplomacy. However, the gains from expanded mobile use has not yet been fully realized by many diplomats around the world. So today we're going to look at some of the innovative strategies that currently are being used. We're going to talk about specific examples of their usage and talk about how mobile is being used, what works, what doesn't work, and recommendations for future action. So we have an excellent group of outstanding panelists today. They include Rob Baker, who's the Director of Operations for, you want to help me?
Ushahidi.
There you go. And Rob currently leads the Development Communications team, having previously contributed as a project lead for dozens of crowdsourcing initiatives in Africa and the Middle East. He also has worked extensively with nonprofits and in the government and financial sectors, including serving as a consultant to the World Bank. Kevin Barta is a program officer at Education USA of the Department of State. He oversees the network's worldwide innovation, the technology, and the design portfolios. He has 11 years of experience in the field of international education, and he previously worked at Hamline University in St. Paul, Minnesota. Peter Redmond is Senior Advisor for Global Operations at the Peace Corps. He is a last-minute substitute for Sheila Campbell from the Peace Corps, who was not able to make it, but connected us to Peter, so we appreciate him joining us. His portfolios include change management, and policy development at the Peace Corps, and he previously served as Deputy Associate Director for Global Operations at the Corps. And then finally, Joshua Haynes is Senior Advisor for Civil Society and Media Innovation at USAID. He has been a Senior Development Technologist and Media Advisor in the Center of Excellence on Democracy, and previously worked in the private sector in terms of analysis and consulting across Europe as well as elsewhere. So to start with Kevin, you handle worldwide innovation State Department. Can you just get our conversation going by telling us how mobile is being used?
Yep. Can you get the PowerPoint up? There we go. So just so you know who we are, if you don't know about Education USA, we're a worldwide network of about 400 some odd centers in almost 170 countries around the world. We provide information to international students who are interested in studying the U.S. So we do a lot of outreach, both on the ground and virtually. Go to the next slide here. I'm going to quickly just go over why is mobile important to us and kind of how we look at mobile and how we kind of decide what to do. This slide here, I wanted to show you, this is just our analytics for the past year for our main website. And you'll see we've had a 137% jump in mobile usage just in the past year. For desktop usage, we're only at about 5.4%. But tablets, you also see jumping almost 60% off the charts here. So for us, obviously, mobile is really important as when we're thinking about anything that we're doing moving forward. Let's see if I can get this to go. Oops, go back one. In regards to devices that are using our website, you can kind of see here, we do have quite a bit of smartphone users on the top. We have the iPhone, iPad, not set, and some of the Galaxy phones. The Opera Mini comes in 6, and that's usually you see on feature phones. So a lot of our target on our website is kind of the higher end user on the smartphone. But when thinking about just like what we're going to do next and how we're going to kind of tackle and get out content via mobile devices, I kind of always think of it, I guess, as a spectrum of you've got outreach tools and outreach methods. And so the tools, I kind of think on the high end, you've got wearable devices, maybe Google Glass or something like that. You've got tablets, you've got smartphones. And on the lower end, you have feature phones doing SMS. Some of those methods, as I just said, SMS, email, websites, and apps, to get that content out to those users. So for us, we try to think of every way possible that we can use these different methods and tools to get that content to those students who are interested in studying the U.S. Going to some of the projects that we're running, our bureau in general runs a lot of different projects all over the place. For Education USA, I'm just going to kind of go through a few that we're running right now. We have a SMS automated advising system that we've been working on. So this will allow students in countries to be able to text message a question directly to a local number and get a response in regards to if they're interested in studying in the United States. The reason we were setting this up was particularly in India. They had to set specific call time limits because there were so many students in India calling for questions about studying in the US that they had like a 10-minute in the call drops. So we're looking at doing it there as a pilot first, and we're just kind of wrapping up that to get it launched hopefully here soon. Another way I was mentioning in trying to get information out, we work with other universities in regards to running MOOCs. So we worked with the University of Pennsylvania. We've run 2 MOOC courses with them on studying the United States, which then goes out on the Coursera apps. We're kind of trying to work through and work around and use other people who also have apps and are set up on platforms. We also work a lot with EPUBs. We're just starting to do that with Education USA. In the past, we just generated PDFs and sent that out. But with the rise of mobile, we really have to think of any publication we're doing needs to be an EPUB. We're also looking to work with like Binu, who then we could strip out all the images and things and get our same EPUBs onto feature phones. One of our other offices in our bureau does that already. They've been working with Binu, I think, for almost 2 years now. And they have a game even on their platform called, I think it's Trace Word Soup. And they have about 15 other publications on there just about learning English, which for us is kind of a natural feeder about studying in the US. So we'll be hopefully working with them again in the future as well. Mobile responsive website. So one thing, and I'll show you a slide in a second, it's been a huge jump, I think, at least for Education USA, and I'm sure other offices in our bureau, of moving from these old legacy-style websites to very, very much mobile-first websites and thinking that way. We've been working, the entire bureau has been working with a company named 3Spot over the past few years, redoing all of our sites and trying to get them up to par. And I'll show you a screenshot of the big shift that we're already seeing just with Education USA with our site that's going to launch in February. We've got some centers, and I've talked to many advisors from around the world, and they're doing things like they're using feature phone in the centers, and they're just writing SMSs back and forth with students. They're using everything from WeChat, across the board to set up little groups and have kind of group advising with students, which is pretty interesting, just the grassroots stuff that happens, which is always interesting trying to help them from DC of what we can build to help them. We also want to mention like typography, colors, and just dealing with like logo versioning. When using mobiles, you really need to think about the usability of it. You've got much smaller screens. What does your logo look like? What are the colors you're using look like? What does the typography look like? How's a mobile user going to experience your website? And so we're really thinking a lot about that. Education USA just went through a complete kind of rebranding of our identity just in terms of colors and typography and that. And specifically, a lot of that was driven because of mobile, of just trying to make it better for the mobile user. This is a picture. This is our current site right now, if you go to it. Right now, it's kind of awkward. Part of our site is mobile responsive, and another part is not. But you can see this is on my iPhone just a few days ago. It's very hard to read this. It's very awkward for the user. This is where we're going. This is the new site that's going to be launched in February. But you'll see it's a mobile-first design. We're really pushing for that big change and that big shift. And I think you're going to see that a lot just across State Department in the coming years. This is also just showing we're thinking of colors, we're thinking of typography. In the past, our colors were very darker blue and a darker red, which on mobile devices doesn't translate as nice. So we're trying to do very much bright, very poppy colors. You can see here, just looking at a mobile device at Facebook, if you see our old logo kind of at the top, it's kind of cropped off. You can't really see it. It doesn't stick out. Now, if you look down at some of the new ones that we've been setting up that are these bright colors, the bright boxes, they really pop for that mobile user and will hopefully help us in marketing and getting all the content out to international students. That's all I got for right now. I think we'll.
Okay, thank you very much. So Joshua, you work at USAID and do a lot with social media innovation. So how is mobile being used in your work?
Great, thanks. So thanks for the opportunity to be here. So while my slides are coming up, I only have 54 slides, so don't be sad. So USAID, as the development implementer for the U.S. government, we work in over 90 countries and have over 80 offices, which we call missions. And of course, mobiles are incredibly important for the work that we do, not only for our strategic communications, for example, our Facebook sites, or how we're understanding how people on the ground are really communicating and understanding what's really happening around them, but also to understand how we can do our programming using mobiles and technology in general. This is a map. Many of you have probably seen it. Actually, it's not a map. It's a geographical representation of Facebook connections. And as the internet is allowing, in general, people to get more connected, it's really changing the dynamic and the previous calculus of how we did development. Now there's this ability to get information that hasn't been able to exist before. Farmers can get market prices, the things we hear about. There's mobile money. There's also the ability for people to organize and really change the speed it takes to reach a tipping point on a specific issue. And so for this is really important for us as we think about our programming and how we create systems that can take advantage of what's already happening and not try to have our solutions and look for problems, which usually, in general, in this area, sometimes we're good at. So USAID is as well trying to become innovative and use a lot of the important buzzwords that aren't just buzzwords, but they're actually have a lot of weight. Through the creation of our new Global Development Lab, we have a specific digital development group that's focusing on digital inclusion, digital finance and mobile data, as well as digital content. So that's how to ensure that mobile money or any type of digital inclusion, usually through the use of mobile phones, can be used. Digital inclusion is crucial, last mile content, making sure that people can get access wherever they are, and we have a number of programs to create up systems and work on policies around that last mile and universal coverage. In addition, this is a picture from our new social innovation lab in Cambodia called Development Innovations. And this is a blind gentleman who's testing out some new software that was developed through use of this lab that we set up. And this lab is really looking at the nexus of technology, social entrepreneurship, and civil society specifically, and realizing that mobile phones are a crucial part of that, because that's how people are getting their information. After the Cambodian elections last year, the opposition got a lot more votes than anybody could have thought of. And when we did some informational interviews in rural areas, specifically with women's groups, we asked, how did you find out information about who was running the political process, et cetera? And they said, Facebook. We scratched our heads because we knew that wasn't possible. There was very little electricity and there was no internet connection. And they said, no, we called our kids every day and we asked them to read off what was happening in the Facebook groups. And it dawned on us, wait, it's not just that immediate mobile phone access, it's that secondary and tertiary effect as well. In Cambodia specifically, we always also realized that it's not, sometimes we get to play in non-Latin character fun. So the Khmer alphabet is a complex alphabet and script, and neither iPhone nor Android nor Nokia had any basic ability for people to type in their own language. So that's why you see in Cambodia specifically, the number of SMS used per capita is much lower than that would be in a Latin script or a script that's more popular like Cyrillic or Devanagari, et cetera. So we worked through a project called Spice to actually create Android apps to allow people to text in their own language and to have a dictionary in their own language and chat in their own language and have an RSS feeder in their own language. And we saw at the same time, though, we worked with Unicode creators and groups like Google and Nokia to make sure that the current version, the latest version of Android does include a native Khmer language capabilities. And so that's really transformational for thinking about allowing people to have this contact and information in their own language. So these are two quick examples. Another quick example is we're working in Jordan on creating a Facebook game that allows youth to engage more in civic engagement. We just finished a mobile app in Albania that's an Android version, just coming out with iPhone for counter-trafficking in persons to get information. That's all great, but it's just a technology and it's just a tool. What's really important is the offline component. So with Albania, it was great that we had an app. The usage was good, hundreds of downloads, which is okay for a system like that. But the most important part was that the Albanian government got involved and created a hotline that was then staffed 24 hours a day, so that if people actually were in a situation where they needed to report trafficking or were trafficked, there would be somebody to answer. The Cambodian case, the Cambodian government got involved and required that all the telecoms in the country connect and provide us with the same short code number, which is usually very difficult to do when working with telecoms in general, to get the same number. But we also have to realize, though, that technology isn't all about the good and the sexy and the great things that we can do. There's also the bad side of technology and what can be used. We say that technology is only a tool to amplify or a tool to agitate. So the mobile phone is inherently insecure. It's all the way down to the very basis of how the mobile phones are created. It's simply insecure. Even if your phone is off, because it's always trying to ping to find the location, someone can technically triangulate to see where you are. So the only way you can get around that is to take the battery out of the phone. But how many of your iPhones can you take the battery out of? Yeah. So for example. This is just the world that we live in. We understand that it's easier for people to be able to do distributed denial of service attacks, to take down your website, so that, for example, if you are working with groups to provide objective information on elections, that although then your website goes down because somebody paid a coder in Eastern Europe, most likely, to create a lot of malware and attack your website hundreds of billions of times a second. These are the realities that we're living in. If you lose your laptop and you have some very sensitive information, if it's not encrypted, people's lives could be at risk. If you're not communicating securely, what does that really mean for what you need to do? And it's not just for democracy, human rights, or vulnerable groups as such, but also thinking about in the health sector, people with HIV/AIDS, or other sensitive information, things that the private sector have been doing for decades. So that's something else that we're thinking about a lot. And we have a program specifically to work on that, to provide long-term mentoring with organizations on including us, and specifically with mobile phones, how to keep themselves safe and resilient, and their data safe and resilient online and offline. And finally, the last thing that we're looking at is this enabling environment. So it's great that we have a mobile phone, and in our country we have a rule of law, and we have the structure such that we can use these things, and in most countries that's fine. And in Malawi, maybe the mobile phone, the telecom operators are in, let's say that maybe the service isn't as good as it might be in other countries, to be careful, but thinking about really what allows for this catalytic usage of mobile phones and technology in general to persist and to be able to be catalytic, such that people are creating their own things. And that has a lot to do with the internet policies and the internet governance. So this is a picture that I took from Myanmar, Burma last year, and it's a beautiful mobile phone store, and you're seeing them a lot in Yangon. And so thinking about what are all the regulations and the policies to ensure that people can still use mobile phones, that it's affordable, and that these devices and devices of all types of information communication technologies tools can be used in the future for good. So thanks.
Okay. So Peter, the Peace Corps has about 7,000 volunteers operating in 66 different countries. How are the volunteers and the organization as a whole deploying mobile apps?
Well, thanks a lot for that question. First of all, I want to say I'm here representing Sheila Campbell. She's our digital guru, so I'm going to try to channel her. We stole her from GSA not too long ago, and we've really been ramping up our systems, our technology systems, and our digital innovation based on the kinds of experiences they've had there. So a shout out to both Sheila and to our friends at GSA before I talk about that. Secondly, I want to ask those of you in the audience, how many of you are returned Peace Corps volunteers? Raise your hands. Okay, we got at least 10 of you in the room right now. So those of you who haven't been returned Peace Corps volunteers or weren't in Peace Corps, close your eyes for a second and tell me, what do you think of when you think of technology in the Peace Corps? Think for a moment. Anybody? Technology in the Peace Corps? Yes. 0. A big goose egg. There you go. Anyone else? Jurassic area. Oh, there you go. Okay. Well, certainly, I love, what's that? You got one? Solar power. Very good. Now there you're coming closer to where we are today. Good. So the perceptions are really wide about how technology is used in Peace Corps today. In fact, I love that Facebook. We use that Facebook image that you had in your presentation earlier about the links. And if you see where all the dark spaces are, most of those are where Peace Corps volunteers are living. So, but surprisingly, things are changing though. When I last looked at that Facebook linked image, that was like from 2011 or 12. The ones that are, what's happening now is we found our volunteers are being more and more connected every year like you would expect. Where when I started in the field with Peace Corps 12 years ago, running our program in Panama, I had less than half of our volunteers had cell phones. And 5 years later, every single one of them had a cell phone. 10 years ago, maybe 10 had access. 10 of my 150 volunteers had access to internet service. Now, around the world, more than 60% of our volunteers have internet service actually at their site. So mobile works very nicely with a lot of what Peace Corps is doing these days. I want to talk quickly about 3 things that we're doing in using mobile. The first is we're getting boots on the ground. And maybe boots is not the best word. Some people like to say getting Birkenstocks on the ground. Okay, people don't use Birkenstocks anymore. Maybe it's Tevas on the ground then. So, thank you guys. Thanks for nice reporters out there. So,
you have to be careful about the politics of metaphors around here.
Very good, very good. So it's about getting our volunteers on the ground, then supporting them once they're there, and then making them more effective. And that's really what we're trying to do. And we're really bringing Sheila on board from General Service Administration and the leadership of our new director, Carrie Hessler-Radelet. We've really started to develop a culture at Peace Corps where we're embracing innovative technologies, especially mobile technologies, in order to create innovation, openness, and transparency in the work that we do and getting services out to both our volunteers and, more importantly, to the communities where we serve. I have a couple of examples that I'd like to share with you. But first, I'll tell you a little bit more about our principles that we're following. It's really important as we're getting away. When I was a volunteer from the technology piece was you find a big tree, you nail up some newsprint to it, and you have a marker, and that's about the extent of your technology. You're actually lucky if you had a flip chart holder. But today we're really, with everyone, volunteers, all volunteers now come to country with a laptop, and most all of them are buying a mobile piece of technology, either a dumb phone or a smartphone, for when they're out in their service. So we're trying to use the innovative technologies that our volunteers are familiar with, and that are simple and are cheap, and that where we can be as an agency be flexible and open to working to innovate toward innovative solutions. Now that often means what we're doing is we're working toward the simplest solution using SMS. We have a really great example of a frontline SMS program in Nicaragua where our volunteers have worked closely with the government as well as communications, some of the mobile technology phone companies there, to set up a system where they're doing outreach on sexual health and reproduction for women in the rural parts of Nicaragua. We call that Chat Salud, health chat. And that seems to be working really well. We have, as far as supporting our volunteers on the ground, we've worked with hackathons. We've reached out and we've said, we have some of these problems in getting support to our volunteers. Just simple things like we were finding that our medical teams were spending 8 hours a day putting together medical supplies for our volunteers, or 8 hours a week putting medical supplies together. and the communications were coming in from all over the place. We used an SMS system there as well. We're calling MedLink. That was developed actually through our Office of Innovation, reaching out to some hackathons where we had some brilliant coders who were able to donate their time and help provide this solution. And now we're actually moving this MedLink out into a pilot project around the globe to help provide those medical supplies to our volunteers, since the safety and health of our volunteers are our #1 priority. So we're using mobile to keep our volunteers safe. We're trying to make them more effective. Lastly, the thing is about getting our volunteers on the ground. We, as an agency, recently released in July a new application. Our old application used to take 8 hours. We've simplified it, so now it takes less than an hour, usually 45 minutes, for an applicant to do. We've made it accessible on all kinds of mobile devices. So it's made it easier for them to access it, makes it simpler for them to apply, and now we're at a 35-year high in applications, where we had in 2009 what we called the Obama bump of volunteers, almost up to 14,000 applications that year. We normally average around 12,000. We're nearing 18,000 applications for this past year already. That's basically because of that the new application process that's mobile accessible. So we're really excited about where we're going with Peace Corps, both in bringing our volunteers on board, supporting them while they're out there, and making them more effective. And I'd be glad to answer questions after we get through the panel.
Okay, thank you. So, Rob, you do a lot of work in Africa. What are we seeing there in terms of diplomacy?
A lot of the work that we do, that we're best known for, at least in these circles, is certainly the work that we've done in trying to give a voice to affected communities and populations, be at those populations within a crisis situation or those during an election or some kind of political event. These are opportunities, I think, for government, for NGOs, for CSOs to step forward in a way and to be a big part of the messaging that goes out. And we've done our part, I think, in transitioning from trying to be the one to put out that messaging ourselves and to give that over to these networks that are already on the ground. And what I'm seeing, I think, one of the things that we've looked at, and I'm so encouraged by looking back, at least at our own work from 4 years ago, and looking, at Haiti and Pakistan and the Russia wildfires and the Christchurch earthquake and all the old crises of 2010, and looking what came out of that, both in terms of our engagement strategies, the engagement strategies of our partners, and the end result, the data that came out of that, would be such a failure at this point. Admittedly, PII went right out the door, and so much effort was put towards just simply the processing of this, the processing of the data, that you ended up with something that was far more observational than operational, in trying to close that feedback loop, whether it was back to the public, ideally, or even simply just back to the organizations that could provide the attention that was needed given the context of the situation. So when I hear about, and I was so glad when the morning plenary between Laura and Sean and Tim and everyone talking about really putting some honesty behind the proliferation of these devices and the proliferation of an audience, and thinking that we now have a broader audience that we can reach out to, very much a double-edged sword. While this proliferation has made it a whole lot easier for us to do this kind of mobile outreach to these communities, and has brought that process down to something far more simplified than trying to figure it out as we went. This is the bad part of building the plane in the air, trying to figure it out as we went early on. The other side of it now is, I think, what we're seeing in terms of a failure to comprehend the numbers between outreach and real behavior change. What I mean by that is that GSMA was in town for the M&E Tech stuff, and they were sharing some of their numbers, talking about certain markets where GSMA has outreach in the millions, 1.7 million. But what I think we all need to do is take a note from them and start to see how we can't get the right kind of analytics and the right kind of quantitative data that's not looking at who we might talk to, but who is actually the active and motivated users of this. What they showed among that 1.7 million is that you've got the usual 6%. So this brings it down to about 300,000 or so, less. Within that, you've got 20% of those folks as highly motivated people that are really kind of using these things. They're highly involved. They're in their communities. They're getting their communities more involved in it as well. And now we're talking about 22,000 people. So that's a huge dip in terms of who are we really reaching with these kind of systems? When we put out mobile messaging, when we put out these mobile websites, who really are we kind of creating change with? Additionally, what I think we found with our work in putting these out there, and the reason that we are trying to take so further and further a back seat in being a part of the presence that are a part of these deployments, is simply in terms of just the trust networks that come with these things, and not thinking that the technology is supplying something that was never there before. I've heard a lot, less so fortunately, but a lot about Yelp for development as one example of, what if we had a Yelp for development? It's so handy for us here to be able to look around and see what restaurants, might be great. And I've heard it in the context of, what if there was a Yelp that people could rate, the type of service that they were supposed to be receiving and what they were actually getting. And it's a great example when you think about, there are schools within Africa who have done exactly that. Here's what the World Bank says. I'm picking on the World Bank. I mean, it's pervasive, though. Here's what we should be getting, and because of, we all know, corruption at certain levels down the road, here's what we actually got. And they're writing this on chalkboards outside the schools. It's wonderful. And so the Yelp for Development, I think, is that kind of digital version of, well, how can we get here directly from them in a digital format that puts it right up there, the transparency, the accountability, the ability to kind of rate these programs. And my feeling about that is if you need 1 to 5 star icons to figure out how your program's doing, probably there's a more systemic problem than just the transparency layer here. And the less facetious way to put that is, the technology should be complementing, I think, the systems on the ground, and more importantly, the CSOs and the trust networks that have been built up there. And that's where we're aiming now. There's so much more to be done, I think, in terms of verification rates and in terms of engaging the public in a way where we know that the information coming in is actually actionable and useful. I typically see verification rates in deployments in which we blast out mobile messaging on these short codes, and as Josh said, it really is hard it's hard work to coordinate the telecommunications to get the same short code, or to get any short code in some cases, and to get anything back. It's not easy work. But what we're seeing here is typically I will see those verification rates that we know that what's coming in, if we just kind of do this in a blanket way to kind of aim for volume and get volume back, is around 3 to 10% on a good day. What we did for Ushahidi, another Swahili word that means unpronounceable in English. No, it doesn't. It means choice. We did it for the Kenya elections, the primary elections in 2013. We spent 10 months partnering with formal and informal election monitors, with existing small local community organizations, with the government a little bit, when they wanted us there. And what we found, though, is that we were able to not only use them as a trusted source for reporting as a better foundation for our work, but we were actually able, when it became a tiered approach. They would send us coded messages that were easily translatable by the system. And additionally, when we had this second layer of organic information, what was coming in directly from the community, we could then call out to them and say, hey, we've got this message, you're in this election, you're the election station, or the voting station here. Is this really what's happening? And they could verify here. The verification rate went up to 56%. That's a huge jump. Is it operational by any kind of military government crisis standards? Probably not. So there's definitely more work needed there to close the gap. I think that maybe this is a plug for the next panel I'm on. I think there's more that we can do between IVR systems, structured information systems, sensors. So looking in the future, I think we'll close more of the gap than trying to continue to bring down this messaging and partnerships to bring down that time and bring up the verification rate. But it's these kind of partnerships that have really made the difference for us, and having the messaging come directly from them has made all the difference. Additionally, on one of these closing points, the partnerships with telcos additionally have done wonders to help us think more creatively about these solutions and to provide better incentives. It's the incentives that we've really aimed for as well. In some countries, we've been able to give credit where reporting has come in. So not only is it a free call now, but we're able to give credit if it leads to a worthwhile contribution to the system that then goes up the chain and affects the change that we need for these programs. Additionally, with partnerships, one of the best examples I think I have of partnerships with the telcos, or at least thinking about what can we do with providing phones, providing credit, and these kind of models is thinking back to the Somali drought of just a couple of years ago, one of the worst droughts in recent history. And we were tasked with trying to think through how can we use SMS to track migration patterns of people affected by the drought and food security and access to food and to water. The idea of coming up, just even getting a short code in what was basically have it yesterday. The idea of trying to think about how we could partner with ICRC and ARC and all the boots on the ground there that were part of wash sector and food, and everyone involved with that, monumental until, and this is where, I mean, the kind of creativity and the kind of shorter term incentives come with this, until we thought, what if we gave phones and subsidized the mobile phone payments of Somali diaspora in the US and Canada and had them call home. And it was that where we just, I mean, what it allowed is it allowed the diaspora, very simply, to call their families back home. And to be able to talk with them, and hey, while you're at it, you know, I've got this 15-question survey here, and I know we talked about it yesterday, but where are you today, and how is your access to food, and how is your personal security, and how's the whole family, and is anyone sick, and to do all that took far less time. The data that came in was structured, it came in daily, and we were able to bypass all of these things here. So I think what I want to kind of close on here is exactly that. Participation can be bought and data can be shared, but trust is only and always earned. And that, I think, is really the strategy that we're personally aiming for with our organization, the partnerships that we make, is to say that we need to make sure that the tools and the systems and the modalities that are put into place are only there to complement the existing systems and the existing relationships of these CSOs, of these communities, of these neighbors and these families and these friends. And where we can find the incentives, sometimes those are monetary, always very personal, where we can do like a daily incentive there, has been so effective, I think, in getting us towards that bigger goal, which they may never actually know. But just aiming for what can we do for them today has gone so far, and that's where we've had the most success. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So I'd like to throw out a question for the panel as a whole, and any of you who want to jump in can feel free to do so. And then after that, we want to save time for questions and comments from the audience. So Rob was mentioning the proliferation of mobile devices. The question is, what works and what doesn't work, and what is it that facilitates effectiveness among those applications that actually do seem to be working?
Bringing it back to an analytical perspective, I think what does work in this is the proliferation is helping us, I think it's helping us all across the board have a higher degree of confidence that the mobile web and the mobile messaging that we put out there is more readily and more easily understood by the consumers of this data. You know, I think a lot of the lack of pickup that was there before was simply, you know, there is a high difference in, I'll bring that back a little bit. There is a difference between, I think, mobile ownership and mobile access, and we get those things confused a lot, and we tend to go with really who owns the phone, but really who's able to use it as well. And in many cases, this, as one example, kind of brings up the gender divide here, where maybe the phone is owned by the man of the household, in many countries the head of the household, but in some cases, in many cases, it's also the women that kind of had access to this throughout the day, but who may not feel, for a lot of reasons, that they're able to respond or should respond or really know, in some cases, how the phone works, or are literate because they haven't had access to education there, you know, earlier on in their lives. And so for all these reasons here, we're finding that what we thought would be the pickup for a lot of these programs and these initiatives that we're putting out there, where we're just blasting this out and thinking, why isn't there a lot of pickup? It's for those reasons. And in some cases, it's been kind of a boon to get the women more involved, to go out there, to realize this, to go out there and do the outreach, and to work in these communities and with these men and these families, these leaders of the communities, and say, you know, we can do more for you, for your family, if you can do this for us and get your wives more involved, daughters more involved in these kind of programs. And that's been fantastic, but it's not always the case, and that's unfortunately a hard push there. So it's this proliferation has been kind of helping us in terms of the digital literacy of the programs, but it has not done us any favors in terms of where I still see kind of the ball and chain of these programs, as it also ups the ante on we need more volume as well. And I think, again, I think we need to use analytics in a smarter way to bring in more demographic information, more gender information, and to make those a bigger part of these programs so that, you know, we're not fooled from the start.
Okay, other thoughts on what works and what doesn't work?
Sure. From our perspective, it really depends on the country context. It's crucial that before we do any programming that we understand the information ecosystem in a country and a system. So where are people getting their information from? Are they getting it from the mullah, from the barbershop, from their mobile phone? And if it's their mobile phone, is it WhatsApp, like in Mozambique, or is it Tencent Weibo in China? And so we have to be very cautious about seeing something that works in one country and then copying and pasting it in another country, just as such. So it's really important to understand really what's driving that and where the power and the information structures in that context.
Kevin, or?
Yeah, just real quick, I think open source and crowdsourcing are two keys for the kinds of mobile technology our volunteers are using. And we have one example of our volunteers, as many of you know, Peace Corps evacuated our volunteers in Sierra Leone, Guinea, and Liberia. And they still want to be very much involved in what's going on over there, even though they're home safe here in the United States. And we're working very closely with OpenStreetMap to help map those areas that are affected by Ebola. And one example that in a week, users together were able to pretty much map Monrovia in 1 week. And our volunteers are working to help to map some of those more rural areas where aid workers or humanitarian workers don't have access. So those kinds of things help our volunteers, in this case, feel like they're still contributing something when they're even thousands of miles away.
Okay, Kevin, your
Yep.
thoughts?
Yeah, just I guess for us, a lot of it, turning back to DC, is we're trying to create some of these tools and resources for our network to use. But a lot of it comes down to just know-how and ability to build mobile apps and to build SMS and things like that. We just don't have it inherently like inside our office a lot of times. And so it comes down to us having to look outside of who can help us with what. We recently, that SMS project, we had to use the virtual student foreign service intern, who was a college student basically, to help us build that out. So we're looking for resources and help and just be able to sustain that as well. You have to think when you're building mobile apps or SMS, what's the long-term game plan here? You know what I mean? How are we going to keep this going when the operating systems are changing every?
Well, that's also for us. That principle that we have of being flexible, but also reaching out to those innovators who are willing to help. For us, the hackathons have been. We participated in dozens of hackathons over the last couple of years that have been critical to developing some of those SMS apps and others.
Mm-hmm. Okay, why don't we open the floor to questions and comments? So if you have a question, there's a gentleman over there. So if you can get the, actually we'll go here and then we'll go over you. Yep.
Retired Foreign Service Officer and State Department contractor. We build the upgrade to the European Schengen network for cross-border security. The Europeans now are keenly interested in refugee and migration issues. And one of the questions they have is there's someone at state AID who has an architecture, a standard, a platform, a good idea, 3 smart interns from Carnegie Mellon, that will come up with a refugee app that has 3 aspects. Before they leave home, where are they headed? When they cross the border, how do we register them and identify them? And once they get to the camp, how do we support them onward? And my answer is the desk doesn't know, the refugee guys don't know, nobody at AID seems to know anything about how to do that. So when you have a major global crisis like refugees on the Syrian border, who at AID State should the participants go to and say, we're building this, we need your standards, your specs, your APIs, your guidance, your good ideas, private meeting in the cafeteria, whatever you got, because we're doing it. We can't find the person at State or AID who's responsible for this crisis.
Okay.
Who do we go to?
Great question. Any thoughts?
I come from the Holbrook School of Foreign Policy called grab the guy and get it done.
That's a good tool. I'll chime in representing AID, although I I don't work specifically on those issues or in our Office of Foreign Disaster Assistance, et cetera. I agree that there needs to be that flexibility and that agility. That's not a technology problem. We can solve that, and we can get the technologist in. It's a human problem, and understanding all the processes and outside. Right. So, and then that's making sure that also thinking as we are trying to adjust to this new way of and opportunities of doing things, making sure that we have people who are not necessarily technologists but can speak the language and are translators between the technology and the processes. And so we need more of those types of people. I will take your card after this and, like everybody else, try to find somebody.
I won't get in trouble for this. Chris Burns and Merrick Shaper in the Digital Development Lab, give them a call.
Okay, over there's a gentleman with a question. So the microphone is coming over to you.
My question was for Rob. You'd mentioned verification, and I was just, if you could just go quickly into what you mean by that.
Oh, sure. So what we found in basically putting out the call, like just trying to advertise as widely and as publicly as possible, text your message to this short code and we will get it in the right hands of people that can create the change that you and your communities need, again, whatever the country and the context is. What we've got back, I mean, what has been kind of the playbook early on when we got started was put it out there, get it in, do the categorization, translation, all the everything, all the capacity is forward towards taking this unstructured information, trying to make sense of it, trying to get it on the map, and then from there, the plan would be get it into the hands in the right formats of the NGOs, the government entities on the ground. Didn't always happen. The verification, I think, is actually being able to provide this data to those services and to those agencies with a higher level of certainty that, yes, we know that this is confirmed. And so that's what's typically been around, 10% at best, 56% if you've got the right partnerships. Still, I think there's more work to be done. And again, I think it's more at a structured data up front and sensor information and more of the structured data up front, which will close the gap on getting it to a point of operation. Obviously, I think there's a lot of government agencies, and rightly so. 56% is not great, is not enough. And again, I think on to the point of standards as well, it's also the additional formats and making sure that they also receive it in a way where they don't have to do another round of kind of data munging there too. So.
Other questions? There's a person over here with their hand up.
Hello. Thank you so much for coming here today and sharing your expertise with us. My question is in two parts. So first of all, I'm wondering, in terms of dealing in contexts or countries where there is less internet freedom, where there might be government monitoring or even more issues with that, I'm wondering how you navigate with that, what sort of challenges you're able to address with that. And also, I was very curious to hear your thoughts on what's happening in Hong Kong and in the allegations against the Chinese government for releasing viruses through a fake mobile app and those sorts of issues.
Okay, does anyone want to make news here?
Nope. Rob, you don't work for the government.
This is why I'm here. I'm the
token non-government person.
I'm the bad guy.
I do have some thoughts. But
to the first part, I mean, it's a good opportunity to kind of acknowledge that where we have worked in the past are not places we will work today. Maybe in some way this kind of would apply to China, but certainly in state-owned telecommunications infrastructures, that's a big no. What we found overall, I mean, maybe this doesn't answer your entire question, but in this context, what we found overall is that the ROI for the benefit that these systems and this information can provide, especially since there's very little guarantee that it's already making it all, the information provided is secured, but not making it all the way up to stack where it's actually going to create change. And go far beyond just simply transparency and accountability and nice buzzwords like that. We won't work there anymore because the ROI of the benefit that it could potentially, even just potentially provide, is nowhere near the very real reality of the trouble that we could be putting people in. So it's just a big no there, and I think that there's other groups like the Guardian Project, Tor Project that are doing far more to create better and more secured channels. And I think that as I've heard their names come up, in relationship to what's happening in Hong Kong now. I think that those are the avenues in which I see a lot more to put more emphasis on the security, on the privacy, and not as much on the kind of outreach and publicity and transparency of these. And that's what kind of gives me hope around these situations and for those activists there, that there's not so much an intention on helping to make it big. The media can do that for us, but in terms of the coordination and messaging between activists to make sure that people stay safe, I think the activists have definitely and certainly far better tools than we did even just a few years ago, and that gives me a lot of hope for them.
Absolutely.
Joshua?
And, yeah, I think that this is a cat and mouse game. The autocrats now, as they're realizing that the technology can be used by them, also to be able to surveil, to monitor, to attack, to do a number of things. The Syrian Cyber Electronic Army was able to get a lot of Facebook logon information for people by faking a certificate, and so therefore they knew who your networks were and when you were going to be at what location, and that's really dangerous. It is a cat and mouse game. The technology will get cheaper. More entities, not only just governments, think about cartels and other organized crime units, will have the additional ability to surveil and buy software that can do unfortunate things, and even high sophisticated software. But there's also the other whole side of liberation technology, where organizations like those that Rob mentioned and a number of others are working to make sure that even the little guy can keep themselves safe and protected. You know, the State Department and USAID and other U.S. as U.S. government policy has internet freedom programming, where we specifically at USAID work with organizations so that they can get a long-term mentoring and understand how to deal with these issues. In the case of Hong Kong specifically, I wasn't aware of any malware. I know some spots where the protesters had gone dark by the telecoms, but it just shows you the resiliency and the creativeness of individuals. They started using an app called FireChat, which doesn't need telecom. It's being used by Bluetooth or just within a vicinity. And so that will always persist, and even though some countries can throttle back and really restrict the speed at which you get the internet, which Iran has done a lot, persistent people will always figure out a way to get around it and get the information that they need. It's just the nature of the internet. Thank you.
Yeah, in the very back, there's a question.
Sure. The U.S. government is getting more and more involved in the Ebola crisis, and I was wondering if, from the perspective of your agencies and actually Ushahidi as well, if anybody is doing anything in terms of trying to report on illness or set up systems in which citizens can report the illness themselves or things like that, what you may have heard or may know about as to what we're doing.
I don't know if we have anything.
I guess the answer to that is no from this panel.
We don't know.
Well, we do know that the Department of Defense is there in Liberia. Systems, I imagine would be part of it, we'd hope.
Right, and we've just announced a number of...
And CDC is playing a big role as well.
So, and we've just announced a number of big things that we're trying to look at innovation in terms of working with the CDC and bringing in a number of solvers to this issue. Also, I'm not sure how robust the Liberian telecom network is. Networks are in terms of even outside of Monrovia. I know it's not as great as you would expect, but I don't know the answers in terms of individuals setting up unified systems that everyone has agreed to jump on. Yeah. That's a difficult thing.
Well, yesterday I had the opportunity to get on a call with White House, and it's Steve Van Rokel's making his transition over to aid. Certainly interested in how I think we can kind of close some of these silos, data pillars of excellence, if you because a lot is, I mean, DoD has kind of put together a prototype application to help kind of share some of their FOUO data, FUOU, sorry. And I've been out of government now, it's like getting rusty. But I mean, they're building it to be able to share data, not only between agencies, but publicly as well. Additionally, one of the other things I'm involved is the Digital Humanitarians Network, and we have our own Skype war room of 130 volunteers, everything from OpenStreetMap, our friends and colleagues over there, to WHO, DFID, ARC, ICRC. So, I mean, there's official and unofficial from the practitioners on the ground or those who have been there or know the kind of the health or on the ground logistics within Liberia mostly, Sierra Leone secondary, trying to map them, and it's kind of a data haves needs, and that's the conversation we're having now, is to at least not really focus on what's the channel and what's the data format. I will kind of give a shout out to you and OCHA, who's done a lot, and I think a lot of the data cleanup I'm seeing from volunteers is moving it towards the humanitarian data exchange, the HDX format. So that's been promising. I think the only standard that I've seen in this field is that there's no standard. So I love the fact that the conversation is not really like, what's the platform we're going to agree on, are we going to use HDX, what's the standard we're going to work on, but how can we create these API-enabled systems so that, and open up enough of this data and focus on these key components so that we're not getting lost in the technology, but we are getting more focused on the data. Because when we do that, we're able to have a conversation of a much more laser-like focus on, if we collected this data cell in this way, we could be doing this much more analysis or this kind of analysis, and that's the right kind of conversation to have rather than tools and platforms to talk about data structure and analytics. So I think there's a lot more conversations to be had between OSTP, DoD, state and aid conversations as well in a big way, and yeah, it comes with the frustration that why don't we know this by now, but
why isn't this set up already?
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, that happens every time. But I like this promise of documenting this and aiming in ways that we're data centric, we're data focused. We're not focused on tools, platforms, or standards.
Here in the front row, I think we have time for a question. So this has to be a really good question.
No pressure. Brian Carlson, from former state officer, now working with Intermedia, which leads to my question, which is, could perhaps each of you comment briefly on what pressure are you to use evaluation and data to prove that your new applications, your new technologies, your new services are working, they're making a difference? And do you have maybe any good?
It's a great closing question. Data and evaluation.
Hi, so I guess I don't really see it as a pressure. I always see it as a need. You know what I mean? For me, with anything with mobile, even before you start it, we should have, what's there, set a current baseline, and kind of see where it's going and what's working, what's not working. I mean, I guess you would say pressure because it's a normal thing, but reporting is expected, especially at the State Department. But I think, for me, it's a helpful tool no matter what to be doing that, even if I don't have any pressure to give a report. Being able to build and kind of make decisions based on that data is really important, obviously. So.
And for us, it's kind of nice that all this technology allows you to quickly, easily get a lot of the basic analytics, hits, impressions on social media aspects or number of users, et cetera. For us, it's also thinking about how do we understand the secondary offline effects and measuring that as well. And we're, of course, because we want to know, yes, this sounds like a good idea, we want to make sure that this is good development, though. Thanks.
I would say Peace Corps now is more data-driven than it ever was before, whether it's our programs or outreach. Certainly, things like where you would never have expected or thought to know what kind of impact you're having or how many people are looking. We had a thing called Blog at Home. Each of our volunteers were challenged to set up a blog and share their experiences with their friends and family at home. And through that process, in only a few months, more than 400,000 people looked at Peace Corps volunteer blogs. I mean, to have that kind of information in our hands about that kind of, and that's considered the third goal of Peace Corps, often the poor stepchild we often talk about, because it's reaching back to Americans and telling about what we learn and what we know about other countries and their cultures. And so right there alone we saw this is very impactful, having those kind of numbers. So more and more we're looking toward that. I think we're just going to get more in the future as well.
Us, we have the luxury in this of being a technology company, and as such, we need to move at the speed of technology. So monitoring and evaluation, we're trying to make so much more a critical component of these iteration cycles of what is, in nerd terms, agile development, basically meaning that every 2 weeks, you're doing these things in 2-week cycles so you don't get caught up in certain things. And where we can bring the evaluation component in is we're trying to aim for where the scope is kind of loosely coupled towards the deliverables there so that we have the space and the capacity. We are doing the evaluation as we do the development and the rollout of the technology in these programs. So if something comes up, there is the capacity and the space and the understanding that we're able to pivot on these as well. And not leaving M&E towards the end of these projects so that we know better for next time has yielded far better results in terms of being able. We don't know everything right now. We don't know exactly where it's going to go. That's on purpose. And when in these like concurrently to these development cycles, far better results. And I think it's those that kind of speak volumes towards the uneasiness. I think that comes with a looser scope of work. So.
Okay, I think we will make that the benediction on this event, but I want to thank Kevin, Josh, and Rob for sharing their views. I found your insights very helpful, and thank you very much for coming out as well.